Left this on the last tape where we had these sitting overnight, just sitting here with ammonia on them, the 64th plywood, and they're ready to pull off the tube, and I'm just looking around. I got another cowling to pull out of the mold. The rest of the, virtually all of the top blocks are in good shape now, so we're ready to move right along. Now, don't you just love, and I just have a pet peeve. Last night I was watching, as I do a lot, I was watching a home show, and I was looking for some little ways I could make my videos a little bit better. I got some ways they could make their videos better. They show you making this great gazebo, and I know for sure, because I've tried to do these kind of things, you don't always get it right on the first shot. You cut some, a little bit better way to do it. Oh, it's an evolutionary process to make things better. Now, in the case of these, I pulled the first one of these off, and it split. So I was real unhappy with the way that I had, and again, this is the beauty of video. I forgot how I did these. So I had to go back, rip out the old Spitfire video, and get some clues as to how I did it. And I thought, well, there's one reason, for people working their way up the stunt ladder, or whatever you want to call it. It's nice to have this. Now, God, I wish I had this years and years ago. It would have saved me a lot of time. I might have been able to, be more competitive now. But anyway, having that video from last year, it was a matter of snapping it in, looking, I said, oh, you dummy, why didn't you remember that? So anyway, I want to reinvent this again. I made up 4 or 5 of these already off camera, and I'm not happy really with any of them. What I'm going to do is try to make a tongue and groove joint so that when the 2 pieces join, I have a strip going down the edge. And then what I'll try to do is soak it with thin CA to harden it up, because what's happening is I'm getting a round and then a flat spot and a round. And a lot of people wouldn't even notice that, believe me. Joe and I would notice it, though. So let me see if I can just make this a little bit better. And just like these home shows, it's so nice. They show you the tube, and the next thing, boom, it's installed. Well, wait a minute. The thing people want to see from a video, the reason they would spend the time to watch it, is not to be entertained like in a way of just seeing things evolve, is the mistakes along the way. And this is one of the things I try to do, is put all the mistakes along the way. And this way, if you run into having a problem or a mistake, or you have to do something over, you won't get the impression, well, gee, that never happens to this guy or that guy. Oh, yeah. None of these people were born learning this. It's an evolutionary thing. You go back and forth, back and forth. And as far as these tubes go, these are one of the focal points of the plane. I don't want to just have mediocre tubes. I want these to be as good as they possibly could be. So I'm going to spend a little extra time and try to get the joint in here similar to the way the Spitfire was. I think that'll be better than this thing of wrapping it around. It looked real convenient at the time, and I thought I had invented something. But never be afraid to just go back to the old way. Now what I did, I let this sit overnight with the tape on it, but you see I still have a little bit of a funny edge on that. What I'm amazed at too, by the way, and I've noticed this, I've got some feedback from some of the regular people already. The macro lens on this camera is so much better than the old one. It almost paid to get the camera just to get this on the close-ups. It's autofocus on close-ups, so you never really lose the focus. Which the other one you had to focus by hand. It was kind of a pain in the neck. Anyway, I'll pull the tape off, and then I want to put that little lip on there. The first thing, I have to get this edge perfectly straight before I can go on to adding that little strip. Always good to leave the dust on, by the way. The dust will help kick off, especially on hardwood. Leave the dust in. Okay, now I could join that and make sure I have a nice tight edge. Now I'll make up a joiner strip. Again, leave the sanding dust on. That's critical. You'll find out it's difficult to get a small piece like this CA'd to the part you're trying to attach it to. The simple reason is it usually winds up being glued to your finger. So a nice way to do it, and you can use this in other applications too, this is an applications piece of information, is just tape it in place. Now you really can run some thick CA down in there, and I can use the tube itself to hold that down while it's drying. Now I don't want any sticking out over the edge here. Isn't it a pain in the ass when you get the part to stick to your hand? Let me see if I can use the tube itself to help glue that curve right into position. Again, it just takes them back and forth. A lot of times, one idea that you discover on something like this. Now, we're going to make cannons for this plane, and I'm going to have to sink tubes into the wing to hold the cannons. I may want to make the tubes for the cannons out of 64th ply. I don't know. I was thinking of aluminum, but they're going to be large cannons, too. They're going to be probably a ½ inch in diameter or so. Now, you probably find that it's difficult, even with the tape, to hold these in position. You try holding this with your hand, for sure you're going to glue it to your hand. Now I can just pour thin CA down one end of the tube and let it run out the other end right on that seam. Yeah, just hold it over the garbage can, run the thin CA down till it runs out the other end, flip it over, it's almost at the other end, whoops. As soon as it gets to the end, run it over, and you find you get a good seam. Let that kick off, and then I can press this in. Now, before it actually kicks off, I can press down that seam with the tube itself. If I leave it in one position, it's going to stick. The glue's going to stick. Keep the tube moving. There it goes. What I want to do is just radius that edge off. Now, if these at some point in time start to distort before we actually get them sealed with CA, I can always put them right back on a tube and wrap them with some tape. Again, it's plywood because the grain is so grainy. You never know when it's going to, these don't look too bad, but you can always press it a little bit by hand. But what I want to do is get thin CA down there and get these all sealed up. Once you get the thin CA and it kind of locks them in place. The best way to do this is right over a garbage can. Put the thin CA on, let it run toward the end, constantly rotate the part, do half at a time is probably the easiest way. I really don't want it to kick off, I want it to kind of soak in, because I'm using this to set the part. This is a good thing to do to any part that's going to be around the fuel, oil, grease, motor. It just puts a nice sealed surface. I'll also do the inside too. Once that kicks off, then I'll hold this part and drop the CA down on that part. Just saw Stunt News the other day, and I got to compliment Tom Morris on a shop. Holy mackerel. Even Adamusco's shop isn't like that. Unbelievable. But there's another point to it. Tom, you know, hey baby, now that you got that shop, let's build some planes. I want to see you come up to the Nats with, and I know he's a terrific builder, come up with something, man. We're looking forward to it. Helpful on the inside is to just pour the stuff in and then swoosh it around with a Q-tips. Yeah, I love that Tom Morris shop. Even Karen looked at that. My God, she says, unbelievable. I am impressed, I have to admit. And there's another point to that, is, you know, just having a nice shop is something, along with a nice model, something you can really take some pride in. At least I do. And I know DeJulia, boy, I don't even want to mention this anymore, he's going to be mad at me. DeJulia's got a shop, holy mackerel. So I expect to see planes from you guys soon, too. That's a good way even to get the thing, before we even put these tubes in, they're pre-fuel proofed, locked, hopefully locked into position with the thin CA, and sanded. This way, if we were to gunge one up, hey, it's easy to fix it now. It's a lot easier to fix it now than once it's installed in a model. Again, another little devil in the details thing. And I heard one criticism from, I won't mention any names, I heard one criticism. Somebody was down the shop one day on a Monday night. You spend 2 hours to do something average people only take, 5 minutes. You're wasting your time. You could have built 10 other airplanes. Well, maybe to a point they're right, but I know the people like Adamusco and Ski Dombrowski, Busso, Fancher, people that are really good builders. Hey, when they see all the little details, they know how long it took to do it. Now just look how nice this, once that C8 sets, how nice that just powders right off with some 220 paper. So now you have things that are locked in, sealed. I can't imagine you could ever make this a lighter part, and it's going to add some rigidity to the nose. It'll never have to be, for all purposes, you could leave the oil on, you'll never have to wipe it off. And it's already got a pre-finished inside. The inside is already pre-finished. You won't have to worry about making yourself crazy. You probably even could buff out the inside of those tubes. Okay, these guys should be ready to start sinking in and then doing all the trimming on them. Now, from Bar Martens's plans, we're not going to improvise on this too much. We're just going to rough this out. Now, it is difficult. It's more difficult than you think to get these both leaning in the same direction and the openings the right size and everything. So part of it is I just start with a rough cut and then little by little by little work my way into it. It really isn't the kind of thing you can cut it right and get it on the first shot. Not that I can. And then what I want to do is obviously get them even in this dimension, and so they both end the tapers end at about the same spot. Again, this was excellent, excellent cooling. Boy, you can see here's the head of the motor right out there. Low pressure area right in front of the wing, right out. Again, I just try to just trace this out, undersize it first, of course. I can only really get so much out of here with a knife. I'm going to have to take the rest out with the Dremel sanding drum, I think. Get over by the vacuum bench, it's burning its way through here because we're going through that carbon and all that lamination. And now it's just a question of picking away, little by little, take a little more material off. And then to get the second one in even, that's the difficult part, so that they both line up, the nostrils line up. You know what I'm doing, I'm cutting into the fuselage former and this, both at exactly the same time. So I'm kind of killing two birds with one stone here. That is just another reason I wouldn't want to make these parts out of plywood. Right now it'd be a nightmare trying to get them, that you could cut these notches in, and you can't do this ahead of time. This is really the only way I know of reasonably to do this. Now we got to make this a little bit bigger. Yeah, we're not quite to the size yet, but we're just going to grind away at this little by little. Use the Dremel tool for big cuts, the sanding tool for small cuts. Now, at some point in time, the tube will fit. You want the seam facing up. because we're not going to look in and be able to see that part of the seam. Phew. I want to make sure I have the cuts down there just right, and I'd like these tubes to come out just behind the engine. That really has worked out well. A little bit of a head start of figuring out what this cut should look like, but we'll go slow. Same way, I'll just go one step at a time till I get this knocked out. Now again, the hardest part of this whole thing is getting these tubes that they both splay out on the same angle up, the same angle back. And this is probably the time-consuming part of the whole job. You know you can get them both in there. A good way is to look down and see the carbon mat is showing on the same side on both sides, but this would really look bad if one of these was splayed out to one side and one to the other side. Where the hell's the other one? I'll tell you, you lose things around here. Again, I want them to, now I can see this one is cocked out more than this one. So I'll take a little material off this side. I have a piece of tape up here, and I'm just into the tape joint, so I know they're both facing forward the same amount. I want the seam to face up, so that when you look into the tube you don't actually see the seam. And I think what I'm going to do is just tack these in place. I've got them real close to being equal. They just show into the cowling. And it looks like I got the angle just about right. Close anyway. Actually, I could take one more little swipe off of here. I'll tack these in first. Put a couple of drops of thin CA on them. But when you think of the details, when you think of how nice that looked on a Spitfire, even though this takes a lot of time, who cares? Just put one tack on each side and see what it looks like. First thing I want to do is relieve these equally. So I have a little bit of room when this actually gets glued together. I have some room for the glue. I know they fit. This is just making some room for some extra glue. So once I get that blended in nice, then I want to seal this whole bulkhead with thin CA. I'm done with all the work that'll have to be done on this bulkhead. Now a couple of coats of that thin CA. Ooh, that kicks off nice. Now the first thing I want to do, I want to trim this off. I'll get a Zona saw, trim that off, and then start getting that block sanded right down. It's like a diesel truck with two exhausts.
We just get started, yeah.
I probably could save these for the other fuselage, so I'll just put these in a drawer and hang on to them.
The main thing that's involved here, of course, is the fact to demonstrate precision technique.
Now you can get this roughed out, knock the big parts off with the sanding drum. So you just get some of this roughing done. But of course, we need to stick in some little soft, I'm going to go look for some real soft pieces of balsa to pack in there just to fill in the low spots. Looks like we got it pretty decent. Now these little gaps, all it takes is, and you don't have to make a big fussy thing about it, is cut some little wedges, little pie-shaped pieces of balsa, shove them in there, hit it with some thin CA, and then we'll block sand this all down smooth. And you just take these little wedges. It doesn't have to be real fancy. Just want to fill that gap, and I'll just cut a bunch of them and put them all around. Oh, all this is just acting as plugs. We're going to shave them all off and sand it right down. And then let the dust fill in whatever little crack is left. Right now I can just get the sanding block and just rough block sand that right out. Now half of the trick here is to leave the dust, because the dust will fill in all the little gaps and ridges and everything, and then we'll just hit it with some thin CA. Now as the gaps start to fill in, again I go around the whole edge. I want to seal this whole edge and let the sandpaper, the sanding dust, just fill those little gaps right in. This also gives you a nice hard edge to work with. Toward the end of this, I like to use the big long block. You can put your fingers right in the nostrils here and just dress it off. Keep the curve. You get that nice air outlet look. And this is actually doing some work. This is not just, something pretty. Air exhaust. You always want to have plenty of cooling. Look at this up close. Let's see if you can. I'm getting that front edge, and I want to get them equally spaced, of course. Whichever one is a little further back, I can just grind up a little bit into it. I have plenty of play. Now I know one of the things that can happen is I'm going to need a little oil vent, because this little there's a little pocket right up where that former ends in the fuselage, right around here, where if you didn't wipe the plane off all day, you'd build up some oil in there, and I don't like anything in here to have oil, so I'm going to make a little oil drain hole, just a little tiny guy, piece of aluminum tubing, just so that it's just that extra little detail. And I think, yeah, I'm sure, I know the Spitfire had it. It's just to drain that the couple of drops of oil that would normally accumulate in there at the end of a day of flying. And if you've seen the videos of the Spitfires flying, when Joe and I go flying, it's just one flight right after another, and we don't wipe the plane off between flights. Now I'm going to cut this. I'm just taking a little eyeball measurement, slice it back on an angle, and then dress this off. Now once I get it that it's just about how I want, I'll put a couple drops of CA in and just dress this right off. Now today I got a couple of little projects to work on here. The number one thing is, spoke to Joe again, and him and I are both going to be doing different rudders at this point in time, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make his rudder up, and I talked to him about the possibility of putting in the scale ribs and totally make the rudder for his plane right to the scale outline, which we've already got photo enlarged. And I think what I'm going to do is make that up and see if he likes it, first of all, and see if I like it. And see if that's going to be a practical thing that we want to incorporate on the model. Since the original one was just sheeting, well, yeah, what we're trying to do here is get it more and more scale, bring it up to the next level of complexity. And I think the real model has, of course, if we were going to do this, we would make a built-up sheeted fin, and then a rudder that would have ribs and silk spans, so it would really simulate the real thing a little more. Now the deal with Spitfires is, and Spitfires and Seafires both, is they have so many choices of rudder. The early ones had what I just call a paddle rudder. Later ones had the pointy rudder, which we did the simulation on. So many choices. And again, the mid-range, what I call the mid-range, the middle rudder, the pointy one. This is the one we did on, I did on my Spitfire. But again, so many choices for a Seafire. If you look back at the development in the book, you have almost every choice of rudder, and there's several. Now really, I'm trying to get a picture in my mind. This angle has to taper back down to where we're actually going to put the fillet. Also, the top piece would be a solid block, and then I'd want to get, and I have the scale enlargement here so I can count how many ribs really would be in this, and maybe even be able to simulate a scale rib spacing. But that is one of the details I think we are going to be able to incorporate. And I really have enough pictures of rudders that it, and again, if this was going to be a scale model of a Mark 8 or a 12 or whatever, yeah, it would be important that we get it exactly the way, you know, what that model would be. But I'm making a fantasy model, and a Seafire really has the choices are, there's even one more choice for a Seafire than a Spitfire. It has that hook down at the bottom, and I don't know, I'm going to make Joe's rudder up first, get a feel for just how that looks in the profile view, because by the time I finish it I'll probably have the canopy back from Midgley. In fact, Midgley's due here this week, and it'll give me one more little thing to work on. You know, this is one of the early model Seafires. This is one that I use for my, let's say, my inspiration. But I can see it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ribs. But this is not the rudder shape that the late model Seafires had, the hook piece in the back. I don't know what the real word is, the hook piece that I kind of like. But notice how this kind of the edging of the fabric covering is. Again, there's a lot of choices here, and this is what makes the Spitfire, the Seafire, such an interesting plane. There's so many choices of little things you can do and still be scale and still be totally unique. You could never make all of these models. Now this is the rudder in the beginning of doing this. This is the real late model Seafire with the canopy that I've already got the mold out working for. And I kind of thought this would be a unique feature to put in here. I wish I really knew where and how this hook, this is the one part of this thing that I really don't have figured out to my satisfaction, is where and how this hook, I don't really want to model a hook sticking out the back. I know on the early ones the hook came out the front. But anyway, this fin, of course, one of the problems that we'll have is this fin area will be a lot more than 10 square inches, the amount that we normally allow. So what I'll have to do is move the horn further back. And again, just by looking at this, I can see in this fin, this rudder, there's no ribs. So again, gives you a lot of choices. And since we're not making a scale model, we can use any one we want. See, now in this model Seafire, you can see the ribs. Even though you can see, now I don't know if that drawing is wrong or what, you can see it has the lower hook, what I'll call the hook for now, but you can see the ribs in it. So I really don't know. Again, so many choices here. This is what to me is very interesting about doing this part of modeling. Again, this is another thought I just had, would be interesting to try to model, is something a little more sophisticated on the tail wheel than just having a wheel hang out. We may be trying that too. And this is why it's important to have documentation of some kind if you want to make these, you know, semi almost scale models. Now you can see the rib spacing here in the early models. The later models, which this is unique, and I just really noticed that for the first time, that you really could simulate the pointed rudder and have the hook at the same time. The later model one, and then the final model one. So boy, we have every possible choice here when it comes to rudder shape, and I'm not so sure which one we're going to do, but boy, we do have a lot of choices. Again, you can see this one, and this is the one that Joe kind of has his eye on. This one you can see the rib spacing in. Now another thing I'm going to try to be doing is try to get a little more accurate or a little more scale-like in my ink lining this year too. So having the ribs in the right spot will go a long way toward doing that. Make it out look even more realistic. You can see some of the differences in the weight, and this really shows you the ink lining too, what would be our, if we were going to try to do scale ink lining here. Now this one here, this shows the fabric stitching real good. I'm going to keep this one for reference. Alright, I just wanted to give you some idea of just how many choices you have. Also, Joe told me when he framed out the wings, he's got the gear blocks real close together, so we're even going to have more scale-like gear. So a lot of this project is aimed toward getting the model to be more scale-like. Now, finally, I got one of these to come out of the mold with almost no repair. I would say maybe this is the first one that came out with no edging. No problems around the edging. It just goes to show you, if you're persistent, what the development of this looks like. And here we got one that's kind of rough. This one's really rough. This one wasn't so bad, but this latest one really is nice. Now what I did, I wound up using one layer of the thin cloth and just running strips of the, I don't know what we would call it, the ribbon. The ribbon has a much tighter weave. Just running ribbon, 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 piece of carbon in the front, and a little piece, you can see right here, a little triangle piece of the Bob Violet stuff. So here's the whole point. This thing evolves. This doesn't happen automatically. You don't pop one out of the mold. In fact, I'll make up one more here just so I have extras. I want to give Joe an extra cowl when I bring him his stuff, and I have plenty of these in stock now. So what I can do is, assuming that each one gets a little bit better, at some point in time I'm hopefully going to be able to just pull them out of the mold exactly the way they are here, that there's no work, there's very little work. You can see even a parting line, how nice that comes off. So, but it takes time. This is the point I'm trying to make, is don't, you know, I always thought in the very beginning, I thought people that did molding, everyone came out perfect the first time. Yeah, anything but. This is, I think, typical of even in the molding industry, and I remember setting up the mold for the line reels when Joe K did the line reel mold and the bell crank mold, constantly going back and fine-tuning it. Well, it does take time. It just isn't an automatic thing, even for totally professional people, and let alone amateurs like myself that were just really experimenting around, rowing around in the middle of the Atlantic. Okay, now here you can see the extra inch of tail moment arm, and you can get a view of just how different the Seafire is than the Spitfire. We will be losing all this top block area. It'll be a thinner fuselage, has more of a rake in the bottom. So I want to compensate here in the size of the rudder. I want to try to balance this off. I want to make the Seafire rudder just a little bit bigger square inch-wise than the Spitfire was. It'll accomplish two things. This was a little small relative to scale, but it'll also, because the fuselage is narrower, it'll make up for some of that side area that we're losing there. And also because my rudder area, the fin will probably be close to the same, but the rudder is going to be bigger. So I'm going to have to interpolate and move that Rabe rudder linkage further back. That's one of the considerations you have to make. See, a Rabe rudder linkage is just not a random thing. You can just have it slopping around. You need a certain amount of square inches, and ideally that would be about 10. And it needs to be a little bit further back than the elevator hinge line to be really effective. It also, if it's bigger than 10, then you have to cut back on the throw. So on a Spitfire we have very little throw. The rudder moves very few degrees, but it's bigger than 10 square inches. And that worked out damn near perfectly. Now you can see just how few degrees that rudder actually moves. And what happens is, to kill off the movement, if you put this horn right up on the hinge line, what'll happen is this will be moving way too much because this area is too big. So what's nice about having this already built is I can interpolate, knowing my next rudder is going to be just a little bit bigger, probably a 1/4 inch or so bigger. I'll move this back another 1/16 of an inch, and knowing that this is the amount of travel I wound up using, I know if I make the horn real similar, I'll have a real good shot at getting it right. Again, last year when we built this, we didn't know what these were going to fly like. We didn't know if the rudder was going to be too big, too small, was the cowling going to fall off. But now we can use this as a foundation, as a building block, to make the next one even better. Now this is one of the exact reasons it's so nice working with Joe Adamusco. He is such a perfectionist. This is the last correspondence. And I'd really like to encourage everybody, if you have somebody else that's interested in building the exact model you're building, to kind of team up with them. It makes making the molds and everything more practical. Now what Joe did is he photo enlarged up the model that he wants to use the rudder of. And this, by the way, is almost perfect. So what I'm going to do is take some tracing paper and make a tracing. I think this is going to be a little bit on the big side, but I can just interpolate it down. By the way, this is nice, having this whole... I never showed this on a tape. How close we really are to scale here. Just get some idea. Of course, the canopy is a whole different ball game. You can see we're really not a whole lot, no whole lot far off a scale. This I can also use when I lay out my ink lines this year. But first thing is, I'm going to take this. It's just a little bit too large, so I'm going to go inside. I'll trace this out, and then I want to try to replicate this rib spacing. I think that's going to be a real. I also can replicate this line where this blends into the tail. I can replicate that right off the back of the fuse. Now, a lot of people underestimate how important it is to get this right. But I just made a rough line drawing. I want to get just a little tiny bit less side area. And the reason I'm the way I've determined this is I know for a fact, from having flown the Red Baron, many times, the Red Baron has a terrible weather vane problem that's caused by the rudder being a little bit too large. I know Strega is just about right, and I know Tsunami is a little bit too big. So, and I know the Spitfire is real close, and it could even be a little bit bigger. So once I make that pattern up, I can go over to these, make it a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger. Now, when we originally started the Spitfire project, Joe was kind of skeptical about, we were using Strega as our square one. And he kept thinking at the time the body should be bigger, the rudder should be bigger, and this and that. But when we finally arrived at what was the final shape and size, it turned out to be pretty close. So again, I have to spend, and I'll spend quite a bit of time holding these rudders up against each other. It needs to be just a little bigger than this, a little more scale-like, but certainly nowhere near as big as either the Red Baron or Tsunami. So having these models right in the shop and having them that I can use them for reference, having the exact scale drawing, and boy, when you lay one on top of the other, this thing is not really far from being scale, so it's kind of neat. Now, when I carefully laid this out, and believe me, this is one of those things. You can make or break a model in one stroke of the pen here. It won't take long. If this is wrong, you have a weather vane on your hands that you'll never correct without cutting a model. It's really tight. I've made that mistake enough times to know. The scale rudder, which is what Joe has here, and this is a blow-up of a scale drawing to this size. The scale drawing, there's a lot of things wrong. This area here is way too big. When I put this up against the planes that weather vane, it's even bigger than the ones that weather vane. So what I've done is, I went over to the board, took what I thought would be the minimum this should be. I don't want this to even be less than that. And you can see from the red line, get an idea. But the problem is now it looks too small. It doesn't have the look that I'm really happy with. And this is why I may be making two different rudders. Maybe I'll settle in on this. Now this one I traced out, and I want to interpolate it. I want to try to give it the illusion that it's the size by accenting the point and cutting some. See, the more I can cut off the rudder area, the better off I'll be in terms of getting the Rabe rudder linkage to work. So I don't want to change this curve more than I have to. And again, I did this on just old pieces of paper, so I can cut this one out now and then go hold it up against the model. I know, see, I'm zeroing in on this. I know this is going to be way too big. I know the one that I cut the whole shape down is going to be, it's going to be okay. It'll be fine from a flying point of view, but it'll look just like the Spitfire. It's no bigger or smaller than a Spitfire. So by doing this back and forth, I can arrive at what I hope is going to be a real good compromise here. And some people think, and maybe incorrectly, that you just sit down, draw out something, and, oh, that looks cute. Yeah, let's go with that. Yeah, sometimes that works, yeah, but not every time. And if we're going to spend all this time, all of the time that it takes to do this is just unbelievable. To go through all this and then not really be sure that we're not designing in some kind of tremendous flaw right from the get-go. Yeah, I don't know. But I think this is going to be our best compromise. I'm also going to try to move the hinge line back just a little bit. And I'm dwelling on this, you know, to show you just how long. When you see a well-designed model, a model that doesn't have any inherent aerodynamic flaws, it usually doesn't jump off the drawing board. It's usually from an evolution where you build one, make it a little bigger, build one, make it a little smaller, and you arrive at, now I'm assuming this is going to be real close. Yeah, that looks about right from this angle. I'm assuming we're closing in on it. But again, it's a back and forth, back and forth. And I'm right in the middle of where I know too small and too big is. So what I think I'm going to do is use this as my pattern now. Now the next thing is I want to make an optical illusion. I would really like to move this hinge line back about 1/4 of an inch. I know I can get away with that. Just roughly. And keep the same look. I know when I do that I have to change this up here or else it becomes an awkward thing. So I know I have to do this about half of the amount if I want to get away with this. And what that'll mean is I'll have to change my rib spacing up here to keep it pseudo scale, semi-scale, half scale. Anyway, I'm going to cut this out now and get an idea of that's the shape we're going to go with. Now I've got exactly the height of a Spitfire rudder. I know what I've done is I've added square inches back there, so I have to adjust that linkage. And I've added a very small amount to the fin. But I've lost the turtle deck, so I'm hoping this is going to be a good balance, a good choice. Now I have to make this final shape fit. I want to have it blend back here. That's where she's going to end. And I also want to pick up the curve up here. So this requires just a little bit of that fuzzy gray area of interpolation. And it's a lot easier and cheaper to make up paper patterns at this point in time than it is to go make up, you spend all day making up a balsa fin and rudder. Okay, now I can connect the dots. I can connect that dot to that. And that should give me what should amount to be, I'll give myself a little bit of room, a little bit of extra. Okay. Now in its final form, again I want to make sure it is quite a bit larger. Actually, when I tried to figure out the exact square inches here, this is a lot bigger than I really want it to be. I deduct the amount of the counterbalance, and it really is a lot bigger than I want it to be, but I'm going to try moving the rudder linkage way back and hope that that'll cure it, because this is one of those things we really can't, on this model anyway, we can't fudge. Okay, now just using that for a rough pattern. Looking at the scale drawing, I think we have pretty much the look, and I'm going to get ready to start carving this up. The first thing I wanted to try, and again this is going to take a little experimenting back and forth, I glued up 3 pieces of real light 3/32 sea grain. Now the object of this is what I'm going to try to do. This is very brittle in this dimension, but once I lay out the pieces that I'm going to lay out in this dimension, I think this will be fine. It'll brace it right up. So I want to trace this out, get an idea then what the scale rib spacing would be, make an edge for this, and just get a feel for how this will work. Now the idea of doing this is I can use this piece of 3/32 as the center. I can radius all my edges and everything, always working toward that center, and get my hinge pockets in there too. Now, of course, anytime you got this kind of the grain going in this direction, it's a good idea to cut this on a Dremel saw. When you go to cut all end grain, you get a rough edge. So I want to dress off all the edges first. Now I'm going to sand this and leave all the dust on. The dust will help kick off the CA as I work this out. Again, I may have to make this over and may have to thicken it, make it thinner. I don't know yet. This is part of the experimental thing that we're doing, and this is what's totally different than the Spitfire. We just cut out a piece of, I think, 1/8 inch wood or 3/16, and we had a rudder shape. Well, this one's a little more complex, a little more scale-like, a little more creative, so we have a lot more choices here. Just leave the dust right on for the next step. Make sure I haven't distorted this. Now I'm going to make these pieces up with 3/16, which is probably going to be a little bit too thick, but then I'll have plenty of material to work with to thin them out. Now what I did, I looked over at the drawing where I want to get, I realized I made a mistake. What I need to have is this first piece extends down past the break line. So again, if you that's the beauty of having all that documentation from Joe. Now this is actually the shrink down drawing, so I guess we got it pretty close here. Because I'm making my notes on here as I go so that when I send this out to Bob Martens, it'll be real accurate on the plans. Now this is why it's a good idea to leave the dust on when you go to laminate. It gives it a nice slow kick instead of a kick with kicker that can make that popcorn-like substance that we all love so much. Again, this is going to be on the thick side, but I got plenty of material to work with here when I go to put the airfoil shape in. And make sure I have the alignment in the back, because you're going to see this in a final open rib base. Now one of the things it's really tempting to do is lay out all these edges without sanding each one down, but I know from experience if you don't keep the edge, what happens in the final analysis, you wind up with all kind of little distortions. So as I add each piece, I try to dress it off and keep it even with the pattern. Now I want to set the stripper to strip off 3/16 of an inch, because I know what I want to have from looking at the scale drawings. I want to have a very thin edge around the rest of this. This whole thing has a thin edge, and 3/16 will probably be just right. Now this side of the wood is soft, this is hard. I can use the sea grain piece here this is more sea grain, use it more to my advantage to stiffen up the piece, since this really is a super light piece of wood. Now I'll glue one spar on one side on a flat table and flip it over and do the other side. You can see where that joint is. Now that'll make it a little bit stronger because all the stress points won't be in the same line. Now I can use this corner to stick that piece right in, and this is 1/16 because this is going to hopefully taper down to about 1/8 of an inch, so we'll have a little bit on each side. This should give me a real accurate. Now notice I have the grain in the centerpiece going this way, and this grain is going down that way. So again, I'll find out just how accurate this is going to be. I want to have this edge about 3/16 of an inch. I'll make it a little bit bigger, and then I can sand the last little bit in. This I can just do by eye. If you really wanted to, you could lay out 2 pieces of 1/8 inch tape, 1/8 inch and 1/16 inch tape. That'd do the same thing, of course. Now just take this and run this off. Same thing on the other side, then I can dress this whole edge off. I want to make sure I haven't lost that shape, because a lot of times this stuff will just be hanging off. I want to get that edge really, really nice and neat, because we're trying to work off keeping that same shape that we started off with. I don't want this to start to waver and wander. Now again, I want to just keep that edge. I'm going to lay out the ribs now right off the scale plan, so I guess we won't have it too far from scale. Super light too. Nice. Now I can lay out the ribs right off the plan, so this will be exactly scale, in fact. Okay, now I can promise you one thing. When you put these lines, if you don't turn this over, and I'm going to trace each one, and then get them exactly the same on the other side, when you look at this from the back, if the ribs don't line up, it's really going to look funny. So I'm going to take my time, trace these lines over the edge so that this side of the rib and that side of the rib are all going to line up. By the way, that worked out real well as a scale spacing. Now, a way that can work real well for you to get these lines in perfect alignment is take a pin. You have the line on one side. You can put a couple of pinholes right through the line, so that'll transpose the line down onto the other side. 3 should be enough. And that'll let us be sure that at least the lines are in alignment. Then before you glue the second ribbon, when the first one is in, you want to get this one just lined up before you drop it in, because especially when I've made I-beam flaps, those flaps that run a tweener or on Relentless, if these ribs are even off just a little bit, boy, when you look from the back, it looks like a pumpkin with the teeth that doesn't match. That's a good trick. And again, I got the pinholes in there. They transpose out onto this side. And a good way to do this, a good way to line this up now, is to use a 90-degree triangle off the spar when you're putting each one in, so you have a reference. You have a 90-degree and the pinholes for your alignment. And they should be in relatively good alignment now when you look from the back. Now I still have the stripper set, so I can use up some little, and this is 1/8 inch ribs. These will be exactly the right thickness. I'll strip off a couple extra ones and I can start trimming off and getting the ribs laid right in there. Now of course these are the right height. In fact, they're a little bit oversized. This is softer wood. So I'm just going to drop each one in here, and I can make them a just tiny bit oversized, and then dress it off with the sanding block. These are all going to get sanded down. And it's kind of simple, just putting one in. In fact, they should be a press fit. Oh, sure, that's nice. Now, I like to make them just a little bit oversized so you can have like a press fit in there. And it's a good idea to get them all tacked into position before you go and hit them with CA, because believe me, even if they're cocked even to one side just a little bit, it really doesn't look so good. Now I'm checking each one as I put it in to make sure I'm not varying off this 90-degree angle. Yeah, they go in fast. Once you get a couple of them in, you can start getting your alignment. It goes relatively quickly. Okay, we're going to get the last rib to put in here and we'll be ready to start doing the other side. Now once we check this all out, and this checked out real good, I can just, all these ribs were tacked in, I can get one side nice and solid, then get ready to flip it over and do the other side. This will hold this in position while I work on it. I like to let the CA drop down in there. Get both sides. This way we have a real good lock on this, because as we're block sanding this, I want these attached to that backbone nice and solid. Now as I'm getting each one in here, I've got more than half of them done. It's not really super critical that they look good from the front. You're not going to see it from the front, but I want these to all line up from the back, because as I block sand this in, it'll be very apparent when you look from the end if they're a little bit crooked or not. It'll be a real focal point, especially the way this is coming out. It looks like it's coming out real nice. And what I've been doing is just concentrating on the back. Now, even small amounts, and as you get to the end, they all have to have an angle, and even small amounts, I'm taking a shaving a couple of thousandths off each time to get that real good alignment. And I know this will show in the final product. This is one of the things that just takes a little bit of extra time. You kind of really can't zip right through it either. Now I have to put a little doubler on here, and this is for the Ray Brother horn, so I just cut an extra rib. And I'll trim this, absolutely do the final trim. Once I have the, this is so the silk span can go right around the horn. The horn will stick out here. We want a little bit of a lip, at least this thickness, sticking around so that silk span can get a good grip on there. Now I can take, the easy part of this is that I have that core, that center piece of 3/32, so I can just rough out most of the extra material. Again, we don't want to get too far past the core. I want to leave the core in place. But all these blocks and ribs and stuff, I can start to get a little bit of an airfoil shape in this. And just take the edge down just a little bit, and the rest I can do with the block sander. If I can just get it started here, it just makes a lot less sanding dust if I can get the edge off here. If in doubt, do it with the sanding block, because if you cut too much off here, it's a pain in the neck. You got to go back and cut a rib out or whatever, or add a piece. And on the side that isn't done, you just leave one side flat. It's always easier to get one side. Of course, this is going to taper as it goes to the top. It's going to taper at the bottom. I'm going to have to radius that off. And I'd like to get a little bit of an airfoil shape in there. Now what's nice here is we're working off of that core. That core is our center line, that 3/32 piece. Now obviously another thing, you don't want to go grinding away and catching and breaking the ribs. It's easier if you can just go very gentle, very light. You can just check with your hand where you're hitting a spot that's wide. Here's a spot right here. One side airfoiled out relatively nice. Now I'll take this over, do the carbon, I'll do the other side off camera. But I'm going to be looking from the back to try to keep that core. That core is my center line so that I don't wander, get this twisted and distorted in any way. Now if you're looking to save a little time or you feel it's worth it, you can do, and I just wanted to put this on a video, you can just, on this shaped rib it's hardly worth it. You're not taking that much off, but this can be your little rib template because you're going to go down far beyond this with the block. This just gets off the big chunk of wood. Make it a little bit easier. Anything you can do to get some off with the knife will just make the block sanding a little bit easier too. I like to do this right over by the garbage can, just let the chips fall right in. You know, here's the thing too, is I'm trying to work off the core and I can get some of this wood removed. I can look down here and see roughly how much of this has to come off. But I won't really put the final finish on this until I get the fin made up, and then I want to attach this to the fin and sand this and this part, the fin and the body, all at once and get all the contours in. In fact, this is probably all I'm going to get done today. We're looking for another session later or tomorrow, depending. I really am excited about seeing Joe. We're going to try to get together, and I hope within a week or two, maybe get some footage down his shop or have him come up here. We haven't decided yet. And of course, Midgley will be here at the end of the week. We'll work on his thing, work on repairing his Aries. He whacked his Aries. Makes me extra work. Now remember that tool we made for the cowling? That's real nice for getting in here. Because we're trying to wrap the leading edge. I want to get the front of the leading edge of this round. And up in this corner you have to Now we're coming up on the end of this day here, and I'm just trying to force a couple extra things through. But getting that all nice and radiused, I don't know if you can see from the back, the ribs do line up pretty well. Got the little piece in for the raid rudder, the little reinforcement. And you can see up here, let's see now, this will take me a second to dial this in. There we go. So you can see, you can get an idea. Using this for a core, you can get a real good clue when you're getting right up on the core. As soon as you see the core coming through, right down the center, you can use that core as your center line. Even on this area here, you can see if you don't have the curves even, you can hit the high side. That's a nice way to build a piece. Relatively easy to build. You don't get this just right. I mean, this is one of those things. If you don't get the curve exactly right, when this radius ends and it gets it needs a nice line of definition there. You need some kind of a sanding tool to get right in the corner there. And that really does look prototypical without that little gouge in there. Or if you try to make this hinge line anything that isn't scale, I don't know. Now when I'm real happy that I've got a reasonable contour, what I want to do is just take this edge and hit it with thin CA real gently. Just get a little bead right down the edge. I only want to do the edge. It'll protect it from getting little dings when you bang up on things. Again, it's those edges. Every time you see a really beautiful model, the edges are perfect. I remember, just as an example, Stan Powell's Dove. I remember the edges of the cowling and everything, just perfect. I could remember it today. Everything that's an edge can get... Hey, get off of that. By the way, if a towel does stick, you really have to sand it off. Don't pull it off, sand it off. And that will happen from time to time. This stuff kicks off kind of quick. This will keep the edge going up here. Just wipe it real quick. That'll keep our corner and edge nice. I got a little piece stuck there. Now you have a nice edge you can grind away on. Even though the part is kind of delicate, you get that edge nice and solid so you can work with it. You can feel where you're high and low. Get the final little taper in there. I'd say this was a productive day. You know, anytime I can make a whole part, a whole framed out part like this in one session, I'm real happy. Tomorrow and next time I'll work on that fin. I have to get an idea in my mind exactly how I want to do that fin, because I want it to blend into the fuselage just right. I don't want to have a maybe there. I want that to be perfect. I want to sharpen up a piece of this brass tubing. This already has an edge on it, but I want to sharpen it up. And as the last thing I'll get done today, I'll get some lightning holes put in that. I've already been using this. Ooh, that's sharp. Now with that edge, you really have to support it behind, and of course if you're not careful, you can go right and put a hole right in your finger, which, needless to say, I've already done many times. You feel it come through real slow. I would not suggest, and I've done this, I put this in a drill press and then held this, and boy, if the drill press catches, bzzz, this is the best way I know of to do this, and you can get them out. Then of course you just dress it off by hand. The little piece that sits in there, just shove it up inside for now. And you can always get a couple of grains out this way. I wouldn't make myself crazy doing this all day long, but in this case this piece is nice and straight and solid. The nice sea-grain wood. The lightning holes won't hurt anything. Because if you ever look at a real Spitfire when it's taken apart or being restored, you notice right away all the aluminum has lightning holes in it, so it kind of makes it a little more scale-like. And all this does is dress the hole off a little bit. A grindstone seems to be a little better than a cutter here. Now, believe it or not, I'm real satisfied with that. That is, even though this gets a couple of grains out, hey, I just feel it's more like an aeroplane then. And compared to, say, if we had cut this out of a piece of solid wood, obviously with that thickness it would be lighter. Nice and strong too, with the grain all going in the right direction. You don't have to worry that that's going to warp or twist. I have a little time left over, and I want to make up that Rabe rudder linkage now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the horn on a Spitfire and just move it back probably 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch. Okay, this is one of the things I really have always used this method, and it really works well. I make up what I think is going to be the outline of the horn, and this is pretty much just a replica of the horn that's on the Spitfire. And what I want to do, I have some holes in here, of course. What I want to do, none of this is really ultra critical, it's all a matter of fine tuning. What I want to do is make up 4 layers of this with each layer of the 64th plywood on a different angle. So that all are, now, rather than just using 16th plywood, which would be real easy, what you don't have the grains, you don't have as many laminates in there. So I think this way is the best way of all. Just cut one out, glue it to the next piece with the grain going this way, then one with the grain going that way, one with the grain going that way. Now this is really something worth mentioning. If this is the rudder, and this is the horn for the Rabe rudder linkage, one of the things you really don't want to do is have it on an angle this way so that each time you run an adjustment, you lose the adjustment. If this is perfectly parallel to the rudder, and I'll mark this off with a triangle 90 degrees, what happens is as you go from the outer hole to the inner hole, you don't readjust, you'll just get more travel. So it's kind of an important thing to keep this at 90 degrees. This back piece, you know, not critical, but to get these holes all lined up at 90 degrees to actually the center line of the rudder would be kind of important. You see, I got the grains going out, the grains going this way, the next one will be on that angle. This is really an important thing because if you make this too thick, if you make it 1/8 of an inch, you can't get the clevises over it. You need to make it out of 4 laminates. That's always the 4 laminates of 64th. Now I want to make a little notch. I moved this back exactly 3/16 of an inch from the Spitfire location, and that's my best lucky guess. I want to make sure I get close to 90 degrees. Doesn't have to be within 1 degree, but okay, now let me tack this. See, this is what happens when you get to the end of a day, you get punchy. Make sure it's 90 degrees this way. And see, the idea of this is I have a little bit of material right around the edge for hooking that silk span onto. I always give this, anytime you use 64th plywood, always give the edges a coat of nice thin CA, wipe it down. Okay, nice and solid. Now I won't have really a lot of time to work on this for the rest of this session. I only have a few more minutes. In fact, I've been stalling off, to tell you the truth. I wanted to get to this point. And what I want to do, I want to think about how I want to do this in the next session. I want to cut this block back, maybe make this piece just a little bit longer, because I want to get that little bit of an angle up in there. Of course, the stab is going to interfere with that, but for right now, I'm not worried about that. I just want to get that piece in there, get that angle so that this all kind of tapers back in there. Now on the fin, I want to have the grain going straight up and down, and then out at this piece I want to have the grain running parallel. So just trying to think of how I can do this conveniently. Be the easiest way is to put the seam inside. Again, this is the kind of stuff you got to think about. Yeah, that would be fine. This way I get a nice grain to work off here. In fact, I ought to do it a little bit more that way. I want to have the grain right in the middle. You know, like, let me pull it down this way. And I can do this with 2. Sometimes you have to just think about this a little longer than you think you do. Getting the grain right. And again, I'll make this the thickness of a pen line bigger than I really want it. And I want to get the other piece with the grain going straight up and down. And as much as this may seem like a lot of overkill, it really isn't. Because having that grain in the direction I want it to go in is really a significant thing. Now, because these are going to be skins, I want to get a real nice joint on there. And I'll block sand that in just a little bit. I want to get a real nice joint on here. These actually are going to be the skins for the fin. And I'll just make another one up, so I have a matched set. These are 16th sea grain, and having them sea grain is really an important part of this. And before I move on, I want to make sure this is accurate. I have the right rake angle. Yeah, I think that'll be fine. Okay, now what I'll do, I'll just make up exactly the same skin. So I have two of these skins. Again, the grain here, I want to have a nice smooth edge because this is all going to get carved in and sanded in. I don't want to have jagged end grain. The only place I'll have end grain is up in the front here. And in the back, I have the maximum strength by running 90 degrees right to the edge of the hinge line of the fin. Okay, with this much done, we have reached an end to the day. I got the two skins made up, and next time we get to work on this, I'll figure out the thickness and how thick I want to space these apart. This will give me some time to think about it. I want to get the grain running down the front here so I don't have to look at end grain or deal with it. And I want to work on having that blend where this blends right into the top block real nice. So we'll work on that next time we get down the shop. And this is the kind of thing I love to do. I get a little extra work on this done tonight. Now, what I'm doing, I'm making an outline, and I'll do most of this using the same piece of material that I use. It's 3/16 material with a 16th on each side, so that the thickness will be pretty much the same on the whole piece, and I'll just have to taper it up at the top. Also want to make sure I keep the bottom perfectly flat with a nice, I'll get a stringer in down here too. And then, this is my master plan, having thought about this so well. What I want to do is I want to roughly simulate where these ribs are. And this doesn't have to be perfect, just a rough simulation. So if this should start to belly and bow, at least I'll be able to see roughly the same rib, and that's actually prototypical to see this. This is an aluminum covered piece, and the back piece is fabric covered, so it'll kind of look, well, like we planned it that way. Now the reason for making this front piece so wide, what we had last year when Joe did the stabs, we wound up with the same phenomenon as in rounded surface things. What we would do, and as we tapered it up, in the stab and elevator, we'd lose more and more of the material up at the top. So I'm allowing for that and just making this piece extra wide, even though it probably could thin it out another 1/8 of an inch or so. I'd like to leave that on, just so we can taper that right up. Now with all the ribs in, I want to get this block sanded down before I put on the other skin. Now while that's block sanded real nice, I want to make sure I get glue on all these ribs, because this will add to the strength, of course. I can get the rest from the outside. Again, the trick here is when you're done block sanding it, leave just a little bit of the sanding dust on. Uh-oh, I hear my son. He must have just got home from school. Come on, you got coffee on? All right, what a guy. All right, that's the end of this. We're going out to rake leaves. All right, and I'm getting this done piece by piece by piece. A lot of little sessions. It's all starting to come together, though. I'll get this sanded out later.
You never see that. That's the trouble with these books. They all get the same airplanes in it.
All right, here's a real phenomenon now. Mike has a sheeted wing and tail for a kestrel. and he wants to make a P-51, but there are no gear blocks in a wing.
Maybe we should backtrack
So what does he do?
and do an acromaster.
He looks in the book to try to find a World War II warbird that has gear in the
Use
body.
gear.
Are you gonna make a Wildcat?
A Wildcat? No, I can't go radial.
Oh man.
No, we're gonna have to do. That's well, you could cheat that one in.
Yeah, you almost could cheat it. No.
Yeah, it'll be a Messerschmitt.
You're gonna wind up using that wing that I gave you. Use the tweener wing. Mike, we could cheat a wing in one afternoon. No big deal. Nice book though. That's Midgley's book. It's a beauty.
It was Midgley's.
Now this is great. When Mike came over here, number one, he brought over a bunch of Gorhams, so we love him. I don't know where the hell's the Gorhams. Oh, he's brought a bunch of jaws. Look at this crutch. Uh-oh. There's something written on the crutch. What does the crutch say?
One of my friends put a little love note.
The Bhagwan says this will need a shim here. What say you, Tom Lay? Nice going, Mike. Anyway, the Bhagwan crutch. He's got a crutch made. Uh-oh. This is the, I won't mention what it is. It's a trophy for one of our fellow Pampa members. What the hell have we got here? Mike, you got more steam train videos?
Got 3 I brought you.
Jeez, how many we got here altogether? I'm going to be watching train. Look at these steam trains. These are the Erie ones we're watching now.
Yeah, Great American Train Rides.
This is what I like about having 4. We have 4 TVs going at once. We can watch 4 different movies at once. Oh my God, this one looks good.
Karlstedt. There's Karlstedt.
Karlstedt.
This is interesting. It's got Promontory Point. It's got a cog railroad. Goes up Pikes Peak.
I've got a copy of that already.
The Durango, Silverton.
The Durango, yeah, okay, I got
you
that.
got this?
I got that one already.
I'll take this one with me.
Anyway, let's quit interrupting me. We're going to take the projector, and you're going to take a Mustang.
Right.
Project it out and draw it over to Kestrel, which these are legitimate Kestrel plans here.
Yeah.
We're not going to do this by eye. Mike's going to make a P-51 whether we need it or not. Yeah, George is looking in here. He was really a kid when this stuff was shot. Steam trains across Rutherford. All right, we're going to try to project it up onto the... of course, first we have to find our Mustang footage. I think you're better off just using the tweener wings and skipping the whole thing. You're not gonna... You can't get gear blocks in conveniently now.
I don't know. Were the tweener cores arranged so that we can put gear blocks in them?
Well, we put... Even if it's not convenient, we'll put them in. It's easier to do that than to do it once the wing is sheeted.
Well, we'll build
These are the things you got to think of before you get married.
Well, we might build this plane.
Before you buy the
We might
yeah.
build this plane.
Sell a wing to Peabody. He's always looking to buy somebody else's labor because he's too lazy to build anything. Sell it to Peabody, and we'll photo enlarge up a Mustang for before Peabody can write you a check, another one of his rubber checks. That would be the best shot. I think that's the best shot you got.
We'll think about this.
I hear steam engines here, George. Oh my
We're gonna
God.
think about this some more.
These Erie tapes are making me crazy.
You know what plane they made a flight about it? It was the...
This is perfect music for you, Estelle. Look at Estelle. He comes in here with 2 magazines and he leaves with all my railroad books, my crutch,
I'm headed right.
all my classic toy trains.
I'm headed right to the swap meet.
You better get me some Tiger 60s at the swap meet, baby. Speaking of bum again, hey, look at who's
Don't make it a bad place.
Never missed a beat.
no fun at all. Now this morning I want to work on this, finish up the fin, the rudder, maybe get the little hatch put in the side of the fuse. Making these cowlings has now gotten to be, let's see if this one comes out okay. They just fall right out of the mold. It's almost getting to be like taking carbon fiber from a baby. Anyway, we got, I don't know how many of them now, 5. Somebody must really appreciate this because Kazi ordered a bunch of these when he ordered Spitfire plans, so I guess there's somebody in Japan making Seafires or Spitfires or something, I don't know. He ordered a bunch of them. So, anyway, it's nice to know that this mold has been so good and so reliable so far. Real happy about that, and of course I'll put this off camera. This is not important right now. They're just coming out like chicks being hatched. I want to take the fin now. You can see the fin. The rudder is just a little bit thinner than the fin at this point in time. And what I'm going to do is trace out the airfoil contour onto the top, run a little bit of a center line down the middle here, and do a lot of this shaping. And I'll get this all shaped by the sanding bench. This is actually going to be ready to join on this today, I hope, unless we run into some kind of problem. But this came out real good yesterday. And boy, did we have a session last night. Oh my God. Mike Costello and then all those old train videos. Unbelievable. Yeah, this will give me a rough idea of how much material. That's why I left extra material in the front here, to get these contours and curves down. And then the rest of it will be that I'll attach this together either with tape or just hold it in place and sand the whole thing as a unit. Now that's why it's important, and we learned that last year making the stabs. You really on a curved surface like this, where there's a giant curve, you need to leave a lot more material on the leading edge. And that, of course, is reflected on the Spitfire plans. But we'll take care of that, too, on these plans. You know, I get the rest of it off with sandpaper. I don't want to get too cute here. Leave the last little bit for some 100 grit sandpaper. Now, I've never really figured out why a kicker bottle makes such a good sanding block when you have that sticky back paper. It seems like a lot of the radiuses you need to work. I don't know why, just probably random. Probably a baby food jar would be good too, but you can see I'm leaving just a little bit extra material here, and this is always a good idea, because when I attach these two together, I want to have the last little bit. I'm going to go up, and actually I can take off the ink line in the front. But it's better to take a little off at a time and put the last little bit in while these parts are attached together. Now what I did, I really worked this edge. Let's see if I can show this. Leaving a little bit extra here. Because what I'm going to wind up doing, and I'm going to do it right now, is I'm going to put a piece of 64th plywood on each edge. That'll maintain that nice edge as this rotates. Now, everything is still just a shade oversized, because I want to put the hinges in this, and as the final thing then just dress everything off. But you can see even this is just a little bit extra, but that 64th plywood will just allow me to just get that blend just the way I want it in there. Now, of course, what I want to do is get the grain going front to back too, so it'll add a little strength. As long as you're going to put this on, but mainly it's here to maintain the edge. The edge is the main thing. That'll make a real nice edge when you do the final sanding. Now, a good trick is while the glue is drying, hold this down on a flat surface. That'll ensure that you get a nice flat line. You don't have the plywood maintain some kind of crazy contour. Now I'll just let this kick off, give it a minute or so to really harden up, and take the sanding drum and get it almost perfect and get the last little bit with a block. Now a good trick to doing this is when you cut the plywood just about 1/1000th under this. It's because you can blend the balsa into the plywood a lot easier than if you leave the lip of the plywood sticking up, and then you're going to constantly be hitting it and possibly tear it off or break it. Again, this is going to get a final dressing once we get the parts assembled with the hinges and the whole back of the plane in one piece. We'll finalize all the angles and joints. Now on doing this piece, I'll show you this is really a pro stunt trick. I want to put that cut in there because I want this to actually follow the contour back. So I have to first off interpolate that cut. I want to get that cut. Again, devil in the details. I want that to be a perfect little radius in there. And you know, a lot of people think, oh yeah, this is not important. Yeah, just go with it, the hell with it. Well, you know what? When you get all these edges either hardened with CA or hardened with 64th plywood, the model's a lot less prone to getting dinks and dings. And hey, the Spitfire is living proof of that now. It's had a rough pre-nat season. A lot of flying over grass. Not one little spot that I can see that would take it out of the front row yet. Even that big repair we did at the Walker. And let's see if you can see this up. I don't know if you can see what we're trying to accomplish is get a perfect fit up there. Those tricks that when you look at the top level planes, you never really know how to get all these angles and edges just perfect, but they always do. Now what I did, I taped the rudder together. I'm going to put some slow dry and CA on this piece and then float this piece in here and let the bottom of the fin be the backstop rather than press it up against the rudder. And so what that'll do is give me a perfect alignment. This will have a perfect notch mesh or whatever you want to call it in there. And I won't have where one has an angle, another one has a little angle, and then I have to even them up. It'll be a self, in other words, I'm using the fin as a little fixture to hold that in there. And I've done this before. I know this works really well. You could also, if you wanted to leave a little clearance, you could also shim this. The thick CA seems to fill a gap though real nice. You know what I'm doing, I'm just letting that piece, let the fin itself be the fixture. It's got a little bit of clearance on one side, that's fine. Now once that final dries, I just give that a minute, I'll pull a tape off, and then I can work the same thing. Undercut the plywood, tape the pieces back together, and just get all of the little final sanding and edges right in as one unit. You know, that by using that as a little fixture, I've got that really, I think, as accurate as you could possibly get it. And I'll trim this all off with the Dremel tool and hand sand it in next. Alright, so that's ready for the final sand out now. Now I'm going to cut the hinge pockets in here. See, I still left that just a little bit oversized. Cut the hinge pockets in so that'll kind of hold this together. Then I'll put some tape on it. Get that joint exactly how I want, and all of this can get final sanded in. Now, as can happen in the Ertnowski shop, we're looking for the hinge slotting tool that's supposed to be in here. Somebody apparently has either borrowed it, not returned it, or misplaced it. So maybe we have an excuse here to make up another hinge slotting tool. You really can't cut the hinge pockets neatly and accurately without a tool. It's lovely how people do this. Maybe I did it though, so shh, don't tell anybody. Nope, it's history. Okay, now for the rudder, I'm going to use, these are half-A Dubro hinges. First thing I have to do is measure the width of the hinge. Then I want to expand it just about maybe a 1/4 inch on each side and cut me a piece of 1/8 inch plywood to use as the base plate. Now I can see I have this nifty little machinist ruler that Bob Martin set, so it's just a little bit smaller than the hinge that I want to. So what I'll do is I'll leave the ink line on. Rather than cut the ink line off, I'll leave it on. And all I need to do, and this is just scrap plywood, is trace me up 2 pieces of this, laminate them one on top of the other. Again, when you're making tooling and jigs and fixtures, you can use up a lot of your scrap wood. And I'll leave the line on here. I want to make sure I have the width right, and that's about right. I also want to make sure I have the thickness. 16th plywood is usually it. 16th and the thickness of some sticky back, say 120 grit paper or whatever we happen to have in inventory here. And notice I've left the ink line on, and that's a good way. Now if these pockets come out a little bit too big, I can just go sand off the ink line. But it's always good to make this. One of the problems that I've done in the past is I've made this where it's thicker at one end than the other. So the slots come out, not as good as they could. This, I think, by using a ruler for a template is a little bit of an improvement. Do this step of it for sure, absolutely for sure, on a nice flat surface. Because if you don't, this tends to make a bow in it. This is the old sticky back sandpaper. You don't need any other more complex thing than that. What I do, I save all the scraps. You want to get a nice 90-degree razor cut here too, because you want that edge to be nice and sharp. That gives you the nice corners. But these, of course, you can save for, you know, sanding blocks or whatever. None of this goes, by the way, this sticky back paper is really handy to have when you're making sanding blocks. The next step, no matter how careful you are, this edge is not true, so I like to get it trued up. Again, I don't want to thin it out, I just want to get a razor edge where that sandpaper ends. It may seem like overkill, but when you get those nice hinge pockets cut one right after another, the tool pays for itself. Just want to make sure I'm just a little bit wider than the hinge itself. I don't want to make it a whole lot wider. It looks about right. Now with another piece of scrap plywood, I want to leave enough, maybe a third the amount over on each side, so that I can't sink this down any further than I really want to. And I'll just trim this off, of course. Glue this piece in position. Another trick you can do if you really want to is you can undercut this back on about a 2 or 3 degree angle. It gives you sharper corners, and a tool like this will last for a couple of planes, so you really don't have to worry. It's just scrap stuff. Now if you get some idea what we've accomplished here, I always mark the tool because I have some for big IM hinges, small IM hinges. That looks like it's going to be just about right. I'll test this out on a piece of scrap wood to see if it's too wide, too small, whatever. Always dress off these edges, otherwise when you're running this through, this edge will chew the hell out of the nice part of the leading edge, so you don't get those nice fits. So getting this sanded nice and smooth, good investment in keeping things. I got some epoxy on there. Okay, now you can take a piece of any old scrap wood. Obviously you don't want to do this. You don't want to do that. You want to try to hold it 90 degrees, eyeball at 90 degrees. Get a little start first is always good. Press real light, it'll catch. Now it's got its own groove to walk in. And just press on it until you come up. You'll feel a piece of plywood bottom out. Even the sound changes. And the nice thing is you have really nice sharp edges. Now what I like to do with all my hinges is go hinge, space, hinge, space, hinge, space, and it's an appearance thing. It's really to make it look like teeth. And I know this seems like an insignificant thing, but to me it's important. Well, what I do is, and again I can do this, is measure using the tool itself as a guide where my next slot will be. Difficult to do this on a macro lens. But you can see how really you do all the hinges in a matter of 2 minutes with this tool. There it is. So you have that tooth look, and that's what I like on all my hinge lines. By the way, there's no aerodynamic reason for that. People want to know. I just like the look of it. Now with one hinge pocket cut, I measure off the space, cut the next one, the space, the next one. And when I run out, and I either have to decide whether to get it too close to the edge or not, I really don't have a choice. But always leave this last one. That's what I like about having this wide. At least half a hinge. That way you don't get the last hinge up in a corner and you can never get that pocket sanded out nice. Just about like that is right. I'll measure this out, get the next one, the next one, the next one. Should be very easy from this point on. And boy, I wish every part of making a model was this cut and dry. Once you have the tool, every hinge slot you ever make will be perfect. And because we use that core will give us the exact center line of every hinge pocket when we cut. We're just going to dig out just enough for those little half-A hinges. Now what's nice about having this little extra piece, because there'll be a lot of taper down here and a lot of taper in the fuse, you don't really need that extra hinge anyway. We've got how many hinges? 7 or 8 here, I don't know. Plenty of hinges. Now I can mark, reference, and write off the core piece, and I'm going to take a brand new number 11 blade and just put a little slot. Since I cut most of the back off the hinges anyway when I actually put these in, using my finger as a guide, although there's probably other ways you could do it. Get a nice deep indentation that kind of holds the knife, gives the knife a little starting point. And for these thin hinges, it's not much more than a slot. That's all I need. Just pick away at it back and forth a few times. Now what I also do is I cut back. You certainly don't need the hinges that long. I cut that off both sides. Having these big tongues going into the model is, I don't think it's necessary anyway, so I clip them all down to that size. Even the big wing hinges I clip down. Now I can take this piece, push it over here, and just transpose out my lines where I have to cut hinge slots. I'll leave these go till after the whole fuselage is assembled. You see now I can just take my
the delivery of delightful music during this hour on Jukebox Radio.
Now what I want to do is I want to get that final taper in there, but I want to hold this together. Now these are hinges that I dyed and the pins are rusted in them, so they'll hold this a little stiffer than if I just had ordinary hinges. Again, just some tape, and this will allow me to get all the final little cuts in, I hope. And now that with that tape there, this makes this real easy to get, and those plywood edges, real easy to get a real nice fit. I know one of the things that you can pick up off the video real easy, you almost pick it up automatically, is the sequence of things, that one part always puts the other part, this side lines up that part, the hinge pockets here line up these hinge pockets. I've seen a lot of people that have benefited from this because they basically put the fin on here and then try to make the rudder. Well, holy mackerel, is that a pain in the neck. So one of the things I think you can benefit from or pick up off the video just real quickly and easily is the sequence of things. Now here's a case where this rudder and fin is going to set this into the top block. Each part, especially with wing construction, carving flaps and stuff, each part sets up the next part, and that's always something you can pick up. Now I'm going to cut this piece right off. I should be able to drop that right in there, I'm hoping, and then I can start building that fillet up. And obviously I want to get this on straight and true, so I'll undercut this first. Just get a rough cut out of there first. Now I can start doing a final, just take one little slice at a time till that drops up into position, and I have my 90-degree, 90-degree angle here. That's what has to be perfect, is that 90. Now, a real good trick for getting this fit is now, at this point in time, you have it roughed out. Just tack glue this little bit at the end, because what's going to happen if you don't do this, this spreads out. When you go to put the top block on, this doesn't line up. Since this is going to be one of our alignment keys, once the stab is in, most of this will be removed, depending on how we actually make that fillet. If we're going to go with a full-scale fillet, I don't know how Joe feels about scale fillets, but we're going to try to do them. Now that holds that piece, and now I can take the right amount of material. I put another piece of tape up there. I have a real accurate feel for how this is going to blend in. Now right here I can just take out one little sliver at a time until I get what I hope is going to be perfect alignment. With that tail piece tacked down, and just can drop this right in. So helpful to have that sequence of events to make it as easy as possible. It's hard enough to build these things without making it that you have to go around a rose bush here to figure it out. Now, after a lot of little chipping and scraping, I just keep scraping away until I can slide this in. And obviously I don't want to have any extra epoxylite or anything in there, any kind of body fill or anything. But the two things I want to make sure of, number one is that I have this alignment. I don't have this tilted off one way or the other. Okay, number one. Number two, I don't want it tilted forward or back, so I don't have to work that hinge line anymore. So what I'll do first of all is get this to what I think is in alignment and tack it in with one drop of glue. One drop, no more than that, until I see how that alignment is. And see, because I have it tacked, I can still move it just a little bit. And let me see what I got this way. That looks good. In fact, if anything, it's got to come back this way so I can get the second tack in. Oh, I just want to tack it because if I have to break it and move it, I don't want to have to cut out the whole fillet there. Now I want to get a little bit of, while this is still flexible, I want to just draw a little bit of a center line on here. It's hard to do with the ruler. I can do it by hand easier. This is just for my alignment purposes. See, it's still a little flexible, so I can tack it in. I want to make sure I have all these alignments right. Now, obviously, the best way to look at it is just sight right down the center. And sight it right from the back. That little center line will help. I'll put another couple of little tacks on here and make sure that I haven't lost that center line, because I can still bend it. In fact, I can get it's tilting a little bit this way. Just put one more drop there. Because once I put the permanent glue on this, it'll be really difficult to move it. Now once you think you have it, of course you always think you have it, and then it's a little bit twisted, but let that kick off. Now also a nice coat of thick CA, and spread it up onto the wood quite a bit, because we're going to make a polyester fillet here. This is one of those things that would be probably impossible to carve if you didn't have polyester. Now you can see how nice, there's absolutely no extra material in there. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to get a, let me get this in focus. What I'm going to get is I'm going to put some thin CA in here, clean it up real good, then put a bunch of thick CA, because I want to get that, that'll be the inside radius of this fillet. Now see, I've got this all laid out with some thick CA, so when I put that polyester fillet in there, and it'll be a small one, I won't be going into raw wood. Going into raw wood is a big no-no here. Ooh, that stuff kicked right off. Yeah, that's nice and solid, because this little spot right on top, in fact some dripped out, this little spot right on top here is going to actually hold the stab down in position, so you want to have that as rugged as possible. Now first, getting this wood all sanded out is kind of important, but each time I sand through, I want to go back and put some thin or thick CA on there, because I don't want the polyester running into raw wood. I sanded through into the wood about 4 times already. I've got this so thin in the back, but it's really worth taking out every little gram of weight out of this. The reason being, this is going to be, on a 19-inch tail moment, there's going to be a lot of mass back here. And I want to give this model every chance in the world that it won't need nose weight. But every time I sand through, just hit it with the thin CA again, wait a minute, and go back and sand it again. It's really got a nice, actually it's got a nice feel even without the fillet in there. Another thing I always try to do is this area right in here, really harden it up with thin CA, because these guys launch your model and they usually have a ring or a watch or something, and it always dings up right in here. So I always try to give that just a couple extra coats of CA, build up the CA there, let it kick off, and just blend that fillet in. I want to get as much of this sanded as possibly can before I go out and put that polyester in there. And that old kicker bottle always seems to just come in handy. It has just the right shape to blend that last little bit in. You always can feel when it's just right, too. Now, even after the last sanding, I know I've gone through in a couple little spots, so I want to get that wood all hardened up. So important. Seems like I'm spending a lot of time on here, but you know what? This will be one of the focal points of the plane. And I also want to get all the weight out of here I possibly can. I'm even sanding the inside. Even though this is a molded shell, I'm getting the inside sanded out. It's all hardened up wood and sanded out, even inside. This is my favorite area when somebody's launching a model new. Take a look and see if they have any rings or calluses or whatever they have on their hands. You get home and that thing has a dent in it. That must have 10 coats of CA on there. If this ever dents up, I don't know, they have to go right through solid CA. Anyway, we're almost ready for the polyester here. There goes the hardener. I'll mix up a small batch of this stuff off camera. And this stuff is proven, it's just Bondo, really. This is some fancy name for Bondo. So it's, you buy it in a marine supply store so they can show, hey, there's Vic Macaluso. Look at that, he just fell over water skiing. They charge you more if it's in a boat store. Go to a car part store, it's polyester resin with the hardener. It's no big deal. Now, it's a good idea to always mix at least a spoonful of this stuff. Don't mix less. It's just too hard to get the hardener right. And I'll use the same stick applicator. This works well, by the way. Has a nice little round thing like a lollipop stick, and lay in a fillet. And of course it's best to let this sit. We're at the end of this session. We'll let this sit till tomorrow. Again, you can scrape a lot of it away if you're real careful. You can get it that you need very little sanding, but the idea is never put it if you don't have CA on a wood, because the wood is going to be softer and it's going to be a problem. And one of the things I like to do is just get this area. Remember, that's what I call the old launching position here. It's where this blends in that you're the most vulnerable. This is where Clyde the Klutz always seems to launch, right from this position. Final thing is I just dip my hand in some isopropyl alcohol. Again, I'm trying to keep this fillet small. I do not want to have a big fat radius. The wider the radius, the more likely the paint is to pull up. And a lot of this is going to get removed when we install a stab, but the alcohol lets me just with my finger do a lot of what would be a lot of sanding. Then I'm going to put the heat up in the house and stick this up by the heating vent so this kicks off. Always wipe it on your pants. It's so important. You can see how this almost powders off when you do it just right. Now what happens is the polyester goes into this, what I call a cheese state, and it just starts to kick off. Now if you have your fingertip and some alcohol, you can really get you can almost get it that you don't have to sand it. And boy, when you think of the alternative with epoxylite, the epoxylite would have, first of all, would have to dry at least a year before you could sand it. I'm obviously, there it goes. This is just starting to kick now. Be sure to wipe it on your pants. Karen loves that. And you can almost get it. I wouldn't say you don't have to sand it, but you can sure get 80% of it in about 2 minutes. Anyway, we're coming up on the end of this tape, and I'm coming up on the end of this session here. But it certainly has been productive, and this will be drying until we get to work on this again. You can see that cheese right off. I call it cheese. That's what they do in the EAA book. They call it cheese. Provolone cheese. There it goes. Now it comes right off with your bare hands. Don't even need any sandpaper.